If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining me. Today, our guest is Chad Sowash. Chad is a U.S. Army veteran and the co-founder of HR's most dangerous podcast around, called Chad and Cheese. Chad is an expert at the intersection of recruiting, staffing, and technology. Chad also has deep HR experience in the military and private sector, having worked for Online Career Center, the precursor to Monster.com, and 10 years as the vice president with Direct Employers Association. There, he led and managed the development of the first complete national labor exchange in the U.S. and testified before Congress on behalf of veterans and hiring companies. Chad has inspired thousands through speaking engagements and is not afraid to hold feet to the fire on his podcast. Chad, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about what led you into the recruiting field and, frankly, what led to the start of Chad and Cheese?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on, Arnette. It got me into technology. That's what HR did. It got me into technology, and I caught the technology bug very, very early on. I was actually in radio sales, marketing, promotion in 1998, before smartphones, SiriusXM, Napster, Spotify, and all those things, when people actually listened to the radio. Remember those days? Anyway, I got a call from a recruiter. It was an internet startup, and that was just about it. I mean, I really wanted to be involved in technology. Didn't know how I was going to do it in sales, marketing, on the promotional side. So I joined that little internet startup. That's what they called them back then. We didn't call them, I guess you could say, internet startups back then. They were just small companies. But that company turned into Monster.com, which we launched in 1999, started doing Super Bowl ads, all that other fun stuff. So really the entree of taking ads, newspaper ads, which is what everybody did, column inches in the help wanted section. And we moved that spend and that whole process methodology online. Years later, in 2016, after all that stuff that you talked about, in 2016, I left Randstad to revive my consulting practice. And my buddy, Joel Cheeseman, he actually had a new startup. And I had been out of the speaking circuit for a couple of years, needed to get my voice back out there. And he, having a new product, being a CEO, needed to do the same thing. So in 2016, I got a hold of Joel and said, hey, we should start a podcast. And it's something that nobody's doing in the space. It's actually talking about what everybody's feeling, right? As opposed to trying to be nice and warm and fuzzy and everybody's friend. We're just going to call it straight. And it's going to sound like two guys at an HR conference. If they had a couple of drinks, they were in the bar, what would that conversation sound like? What would that sound like? And that's what Chad and Cheese is. That was the origin, right? It took me about a year to get his ass off the couch. We finally did, and here we are today. We're actually full-time podcasters, talking into mics at events all over the world. So yeah, it's been one heck of a ride.
Oh, that's fabulous. So given your focus in technology over the last 10 years, what kind of changes have you seen technology bring to the HR professions? Anything that jumps out at you?
Yeah, an evolutionary mindset. It's not just innovation, it's evolution, and In HR, the most evolutionary thing I think we had was the fax machine at that point, for goodness sakes. We were taking, as I'd said earlier, the newspaper to the internet. HR practitioners had to start to become technologists, and we have to continue to do that because technology is so fluid. And then they had to learn how to react to scale. Because again, if you had individuals that were applying to jobs through fax or actually coming in to drop off their resume or what have you, that's not a lot of individuals. Once you turn on the internet and you allow everybody to apply very easily with, filling out a form and then a click of a button, then that's what changes HR, talent acquisition, and the entire process methodology is scale and trying to respond and react to scale.
Yeah. So, as we look over the last couple of years, I think you agree that in the technology space and the startup space, we've seen some corrective layoffs happening and, funding for different, key HR programs. And what's your sense of how this have affected the HR space with this issue?
Yeah, I think tech funding, we'll go with the latter part first. The tech funding has only created more noise in the market. When there's that much noise in the market and that much money in the market, you're going to get more noise, right? You're going to get a ton of individuals who feel that there's a problem in the space when the actual HR industry doesn't really see a problem. So you see a ton of platforms / features that are created that are solving problems that the industry doesn't even really believe exist. So that, to an extent, is one of the biggest issues. And then you don't know whether to understand and or believe if this is just an Elixir kind of vaporware platform or if it's real solid tech. And that's been really hard with all the funding and all the noise. I think when we talk about layoffs to me aren't the problem. What's affected HR during the pandemic and after is not keeping our eye on the ball. Reports show that Amazon alone lost $9 billion in revenue due to attrition. So attrition alone has grown due to employees not being satisfied with their employer, their duties, their inability to be promoted or join another department for starters. And attrition has then revealed a less productive workforce. We keep hearing about how the workforce is losing productivity. Well, why? Well, employees are now doing several jobs as they cover for open positions, which does nothing more than drive fatigue and more attrition. Our hiring cycles are way too long. Candidates get bored and drop out, or they finally get hired, start onboarding, start training, and then how many months has that position really been unfilled? Somebody was hired, but nobody's really doing that job. So the fatigue really sets in. While those positions stay unfilled, how much money has that company lost? Because we don't talk about revenues and how those open positions actually mean money. And if they don't, they shouldn't be open positions in the first place because they are either hurting product development, sales, customer service, which is around customer retention, creating more, obviously, opportunity for wallet share, those types of things. So, the problem is that we don't treat our most valued assets like valued assets. We always hear CEOs say our most valued assets are employees. Well, this is demonstrating through all of this attrition, it's just not the case.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So given that expertise you have with HR, or given with expertise in technology that focuses in HR, what are some of the up and coming companies that you're keeping an eye on that are going to make an impact in this industry in the years to come?
Yeah, well, I think, there are plenty, and I'm a little biased because we have sponsors and I actually advise startups and whatnot, but and we could actually do a whole show on this topic because there are so many gaps that need to be filled that I think startups do an amazing job because they can be more nimble, more fluid with the market. But right out of the gate, there's Talk, Push, and Paradox, which are conversational AI systems that have turned into applicant tracking systems. We've had applicant tracking systems since, the late 90s, early 2000s. They really haven't changed that much. I mean, they've added more features. They've been able to do more, but they really, at the core, haven't changed the foundational functionality. This is where we see the Talk Pushes and the Paradox and those applicant tracking systems that are adopting different experiential conversational AI and those types of things, I think are pretty amazing. You've got performance-based ad platforms, Veritone, which wasn't even a name in our industry 2 years ago, acquired PandoLogic, and they acquired Broadbean. So instead of duration-based, as we talked at newspaper ads onto the internet, well, that was all duration-based. Now we're talking about performance-based and catching up to marketing and advertising. Then you've got the Tadios of the world, which are proof-driven simulation hiring programs. So instead of looking at somebody's resume, you're actually looking at job simulations to see if they can do the job, the actual competency. Then you've got Job Pixel on the video platform side. Sonic Jobs is trying to democratize easy apply for job sites all over the world. Factory Fix on the manufacturing side. Real Links for employee referrals, and Remote Bridge, which is VR without the goggles, which to me has always been the biggest issue with VR, is who in the hell is going to run around with those goggles on their face, for goodness sakes, right? I think there's an engagement opportunity with VR, but to be able to step into it, and I think we'll get to the point where we actually have goggles and that kind of stuff, but I think we have to baby step into it. And just slapping, some goggles on humans' faces, I don't think is really the answer right out of the gate.
Yeah, you mentioned that a lot of companies that are up and coming there. What do you think the risk of businesses today that, there's a lot of large organizations out there in this space, and they're gonna start a massive acquisition, and as these companies get bigger, what do you think the risk is in that space for that? Anything jumps out at you?
Yeah, I think, what you're talking about, the implosion, some are just going to go away. We've already seen that. We've seen that in good times, so we're definitely going to see it in bad times. We're going to see a lot of organizations on the clearance rack sale, right? And then we're going to see, just the basic consolidation. At that point, what I need and companies need to understand is you always have to have a backup plan for any piece of tech, even your largest core tech providers. I mean, because if you remember back, about a year or so ago, UKG had a ransomware attack and their customers couldn't pay their employees. UKG is a major player, right? So as we talk about these new up and coming startups and so on and so forth, that risk, to be quite frank, is much, much lower than actually having a backup plan for our core platforms. And these should have backup plans that are a part of our strategy that everybody should understand.
So, as the HR pros are out there trying to, identify different service providers, what characteristics that should they be looking for to identify a stable company in this space? Any elements jump out at you?
Yeah. I mean, I think my last example was that it's hard when you have a UKG, which has years in service, numbers of clients, thousands and probably tens of thousands of clients, for goodness sakes, incredible revenues. You'd think that they would be a perfect company to actually go with, but nobody's safe nowadays, Arnette. Nobody's safe. So the backup plan is the biggest key. Not to mention, if you're only looking at those companies who are the solid, been around for 10 years, the problem is, for the most part, you won't be able to be nimble without using startups and point solutions. And they are the most volatile, which is why you always, again, need that backup plan. Great due diligence. I can't say this enough. Most HR companies, or most HR practitioners, They try to do the due diligence themselves. They should not. They're way too busy day to day to day doing the hard work of HR in the first place. They have no clue in many cases of how fast tech is actually moving. They need to start looking at external experts in the space, because that's just way too much anxiety and work. Obviously, listen to the Chad and Cheese podcast to get, a little bit more insight on what's going on, but that's still not enough. You need an external expert.
Yeah. So, one of the hot topics in HR has always been recruiting. And I think it always will be. But what can HR technology companies provide, or what are they providing in this space to enhance the efforts of the professionals out there?
Yeah, I think going beyond recruiting, this is about a total talent cycle. And when you're talking about the ability to keep your employees engaged, we talked about attrition earlier, right? That's a big issue. You have to have great employee engagement. And I don't just mean pulse surveys. We need to have additional training. We have to have legitimate opportunities, not to just go up through the ranks in your department, but also to be able to prospectively join other departments, right? Usually it's very hard when you're a manager and you have a great A player on your staff. You don't want to get rid of them. So therefore you hold on to them too tight. The problem is you might not lose them internally to somebody else in another department, but you will lose them externally. So we have to think more about our employee engagement and something that really is meaningful to them. I mean, even some of the things that you would think are basic, like being able to have your kids taken care of during the day. I mean, that should be incredibly basic as a benefit and standard for every company, but it's not. So these are the things that we really, really have to think about.
Yeah. So we're sitting here in June of 2023, and the hot topic across every industry is artificial intelligence. You mentioned it. You mentioned it a little earlier, but tell us how AI is going to impact this industry across everything, recruiting to retention to all elements of employee engagements.
Yeah, it's amazing how one company, OpenAI, their go-to-market strategy with ChatGPT blew this whole thing up. I mean, it is incredibly amazing, and it's a lesson, to be quite frank, on how to go to market. I don't know if it's really a lesson on how to do AI. We will see, as Google does AI, as Amazon does AI, and so on and so forth. But yes, we are definitely going to see, and we've already seen that some organizations have taken many tasks away from individuals. Now, let's say from a recruiter standpoint, as we talked about scale earlier, recruiters have become administrative wizards, and that's not their job. Their job is to connect with people, is to give those candidates a white glove service, right? An understanding of what the organization is about. And they can't do that because they're bogged down with too much administrivia, which has also created a black hole, right? Candidates go in and they never come out. They never get any response, any engagement, any interaction. And that is horrible for an organization's brand, especially if you're a consumer brand. You just might have lost a customer, right? Not to mention that individual who might have been a customer and paid for, transactions online, that's nothing compared to the amount of blood, sweat, and tears and love of your brand if they came to work for you. So when it comes to AI, I see AI taking a lot of these tasks away from an individual like a recruiter and allowing them to be more human. Because over the last 20 years, Arnette, we've become less human through the use of tech, because it has given us so many tasks that we've had to go through, so much busy work. AI, at least in the first phase, I believe, can make us all much more human.
You touched on the most important element, which is that human touch component for our professionals. because I was going to lead into a question about, well, what is it that AI can't replace from the HR? And I think you just touched on the very first thing, which is that human touch. Are there any other elements that you see AI not being able to really replace?
Yeah, that's a hard question. And I truly don't know. As we take a look at how generative AI and then deep learning, I mean, there's just so much that goes along with this long tail. I think in the next 5 years, we're definitely going to see, as people talk about job loss, we're also going to see large amounts of job creation. And not answering your question, but answering your question, I think what we can do to be able to secure our jobs long term is to be the best in our space at using AI to do our job better. So as we take a look at some writers who are using Chat GPT to be able to kind of scrub their information, or coders who are scrubbing their code and they're helping them through hard spots and whatnot, they're making those coders better, right? Now, in the end, I know everybody's saying, well, you're also training the AI to be a coder, which is going to get rid of that coder. Well, there's going to have to be QA, QC, right? There's always going to have to be a guiding hand. Hopefully through government regulation, there's always going to have to be a guiding hand and a human there. But that human will be the one who adopted AI, not the one who shunned it.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right on with that issue around government oversight or compliance. And I will tell you, in the background screening industry, we've already gotten directives, from, or federal organizations that oversee the pre-employment background screening industry that really talk about how there has to be a human element to the verification process. So I think to your point, we're already seeing that. Before we sign off, I'd like to ask you a question that I asked every guest, and that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background check on you, would there be any surprises?
I'm sure there would. I mean, and if I'm living my life right, there should be, right? You need to get out there. You need to break stuff. You need to have a great time. We only get so much time on this crazy blue orb. So yeah, I hope they find something that I'm not even aware of.
That's fabulous. Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And I really appreciate your perspective and commitment to keeping the industry honest. And I know our listeners will too. So tell us, before we sign off, where our audience can follow you and keep up with what's going on.
Sure. Yep. Well, keep up with what's going on. You can go to wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. Just look for the Chad and Cheese podcast. That's where you can definitely stay in tune with what's going on in the industry. In me, you can go to LinkedIn. I am the only Chad Sowash, Sowash there. Feel free to stalk me and or connect with me.
And now for a minute with our founders to help you get to know the people behind background screening services from S2 Verify. So Bill and Jim, I really appreciate you guys taking time today to have this conversation. And I'd like to ask each of you, just where we start off here, how did your career path bring you to the background screening industry? Bill, why don't you start us off?
Sure, Arnette. I actually started right out of college in the background screening or the employment screening industry with a company called EMSI, which was a paramedical company that did urine collection. And in fact, one of our first clients was the Secret Service, so I'm sure that we collect urine at some period in time. Then I moved into the background screening industry in 2002 and had joint ownership for it and choice points. So it's basically been my whole career.
Yeah. Jim, how about you? Where did your career path start?
Not that much different, really. My days in this space started back at Equifax, but not on my credit bureau side, but on the data side. Equifax, probably most people don't know at that time, was in the background screening business. And we did investigative auto reports and investigative property reports. And so I kind of got an early introduction into data, analytics, risk assessment, and kind of just kept on moving forward from there.
Yeah. So let's take a look back at those years where we were working for others. And Bill, if you look back, who do you think the most effective manager that maybe you had in the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s might have been? Because we've been on our own here building the business since 2009. So if you reflect back, who do you think was one of the more effective managers that you had, and why?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a guy named Dr. Lowell Foster, who had a PhD from he was the CEO of MedExpress, which was a drug testing laboratory in Memphis. He was not only extremely brilliant, but most people that are that smart don't have any common sense. And so this guy actually had a lot of common sense. And so he spent a lot of time with me, just molding me and, accepting me as who I am, and really made me into the, executive that I am today. I mean, he taught me a lot about financials and acquisitions and just a lot of different things. So he was a extremely gifted individual.
Yep. Great. Jim, how about you?
I would tell you it was probably a tie. Early in my career, in the world of selling, there was a gentleman in New York City who I had the pleasure of working for. His name was Frank Robinson, not the baseball player, but name equivalent. And he probably, Arnette, was one of the most polished, professional individuals I had ever encountered. His approach to people, his approach to problem solving, his respect for business and others, process, et cetera, and really began to understand, how you approach others professionally and the image you want to portray and how you portray it. And then a little later in life, and Billy can relate to this, I ran into this chief operating officer known as Doug Curling. And Doug and I to this day remain great friends. But what I really took away from Doug, probably the most balanced, low-key, effective manager you'd want to meet. And Doug had a saying, Billy and I use it to this day, which is every time you would encounter difficulty or encounter a problem, Doug would sit back and go, look, just work the problem, right? Because you want to get all hyper and all excited and the wheels are coming off the cart, and he would sit back and go, just work the problem. One step at a time, work the problem till you're done with it. And that has stuck with me for a long time in terms of Billy and I would do this every day. Just work the problem. You try to keep your, for lack of a better term, your temper in control or your excitement in control and just work your way through it. So those two guys, probably the biggest influence on me.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me back to over my career, I also had a number of great mentors, but one in particular is when I was leading the Secret Service Public Affairs program, and the assistant director I had at the time was a guy named Terry Samway, and he had a motto of no surprises. And, I kind of think about that concept every day. And it's like, don't give clients surprises, don't give your employees surprises, don't give your loved ones surprises. And so that's a motto that I think is worked well for me. For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our conversation with Mike Klein. He's an international communications expert and founder of We Lead Comms, who will talk with us about the importance of HR and communications partnership. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Chad, thanks so much for joining us today, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thanks, Arnette.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.